Hey guys, tonight we're stepping back into a world where nothing is simple, not dinner, not silverware, not even the act of walking through a hallway without being powdered by accident. We were visiting the Baroque Banquet, that bizarre gilded intersection of power food and utter culinary chaos. Picture this: an aristocrat needs to prove their worth, not on a battlefield, not in a court of law, but at the dinner table by serving a 14-course feast involving peacocks, aspics, citrus sorbets, and a goose wearing a wig. You, my friend, are invited, but you probably won't survive it. Not because of any duels or poisons, though we will get to those, but because your stomach will tap out before the candied turnips arrive. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing how far this weird little dinner party travels. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You don't enter through the front door, not yet. You enter through the kitchens. Because every great feast begins with suffering. The palace kitchens are not kitchens in the modern sense. They are small cities of fire, steel, sweat, and ambition. You walk through an arched doorway and are immediately assaulted politely but thoroughly by the sheer density of activity. It's hot, not warm, hot. Think Smithy meets Spice Market hot. Huge hearths burn day and night. Flames dance beneath cauldrons large enough to boil nobles whole, and let's be honest, someone's probably fantasized about it. Iron spits groan under the weight of entire boars. There are at least 3 fires going on in separate corners, and only 2 of them are intentional. You dodge a boy running with a bowl of something bright green and steaming. He's chased by a man shouting about missing herbs. A third cook appears from the smoke carrying what looks like a roasted deer, wearing an expression of mild concern. You've entered the brigade. A mainstream historical fact, Baroque kitchens were often organized under the brigade de cuisine system or its early form. Each cook had a strict specialization: sauces, roasts, pastries, jellies, and of course the saucier. More on that chaos later. Command came from the chef de cuisine, often a terrifying mustachioed demigod who answered to no one but the noble they fed. The chef here is precisely that. You spot him across the scullery, tall hat, stained apron, eyebrows like accusations. He's currently screaming at a butcher who has apparently committed the unpardonable sin of slicing a pear too vertically. The pear is resliced. The butcher nods grimly. Order is restored. You move deeper. The walls are lined with wooden shelves sagging under the weight of ceramic pots, dried herbs and jars of preserved lemons that glow like bottled suns. A girl no older than 12 is whisking egg whites in a copper bowl larger than her torso. Nearby, a group of boys take turns on the spit crank. Elbow grease is cheaper than clockwork. You notice something strange. It's not all yelling. They're singing. Someone hums an old folk tune near the pastry station. A baker taps out a rhythm on his pie crust with a fork. The air vibrates not just with heat, but with purpose. This isn't a kitchen. It's a battlefield in formal wear. And it's all for tonight's banquet. You're handed a folded parchment. Not by request, just by proximity. It's the early draft of the menu, or what you assume is a menu. The writing is elaborate. The ink slightly smeared, and the names of dishes sound more like prophecies than food. The reconciliation of the river trout, victory of sugar over flesh, turnip redemption. You smile. You're terrified. Now comes your quirky tidbit. In some kitchens, apprentices were assigned to sing the names of dishes aloud while they were being plated to improve memory and morale. The chant of 4 pheasants, 5 puffed pears, 6 noble onions was once recorded in a French noble household. It was set to the tune of a morning hymn. No one found it strange. You continue your tour, stepping around baskets of lemons from Portugal, crates of live eels. One escapes. No one reacts, and a man very calmly stuffing cherries into a roasted duck through its beak. Everywhere you look, food is becoming something else. A fish becomes a spiral. A swan becomes a pudding. A cabbage becomes a crown. You pass by the jelly station. One mold has collapsed. A boy weeps. Another jelly, shaped like a cathedral, shimmers in silent triumph beside him. No one offers comfort. The jelly is sacred. Failure is not. In the center of the room stands the sauce circle. 4 large pots, one in each corner, each bubbling with a different liquid. Cream. wine, bone stock, something yellow that smells of ambition. Around them, 5 men stir in synchronized movements as if engaged in a religious ritual. 1 sneezes. 3 gasp. 1 whispers, "Start again." A shout echoes from the poultry corridor. The bishop's goose is still underdressed. Someone cries. A flurry of feathers, a flapping of aprons. A tray is launched. A hat is lost. A second goose is retrieved and gently massaged with rosemary oil. You finally make your way to the pastry wing. Here things are quieter, more focused. The sugar sculptors are bent over their confections, hands moving with the precision of jewelers. A horse made entirely of brittle is mid-gallop. A spinning sugar globe contains tiny candied ships. You recognize one of them. You're not sure how. Historians still argue whether these elaborate kitchens were more theater than necessity. Some claim the excess masked political anxieties overthrow via aspic. Others say it was just the natural result of centuries of inherited insecurity wrapped in gold leaf. Whatever the truth, one thing is clear: this kitchen is not feeding people. It is telling them who they are. And tonight you're part of the performance. A boy tugs your sleeve. "Time to bring the menu upstairs," he says, as though you've always worked here. You nod. You take the rolled parchment. It smells of ink and roasted rosemary. You pass the jelly again. The sad one. It wobbles as you walk by, as if trying to rebuild its pride. You give it a nod. You believe in it. And then you head for the stairs menu in hand, your clothes now thoroughly infused with every smell imaginable. The feast has not yet begun. But the story is already well underway. The menu feels heavier than it should. Maybe it's the paper stock. Maybe it's the centuries of culinary guilt it represents. Or maybe it's just the knowledge that somewhere upstairs someone will dramatically misinterpret a dish titled "The Repentance of the Beetroot" as a personal insult. You ascend the servant's stairwell menu, tucked under your arm, ducking low beams and dodging the occasional runaway spoon. The stone steps are smooth from centuries of footsteps, each groove worn by pastry girls, spit boys, and panic-stricken sauciers, hauling stock pots like war drums. When you reach the main floor, the temperature drops, not from cold, but from expectation. The air is scented with lavender and wax, and it's quiet, oppressively so. You pass beneath an archway carved with cherubs, all of whom seem to be judging your posture. A footman gestures you forward down a corridor lined with oil paintings of stern men holding improbably small teacups. At last you reach the antechamber. Inside waits the maitre d'hotel, a man whose collar is so starched it could deflect cannonballs. He doesn't speak. He just extends his hand for the menu. You hesitate. You've seen what's inside. It's elaborate. Still, you pass it over. He opens the scroll with ceremonial gravity. It unfurls once, twice. A third time, it spills onto the marble floor like a papal decree. He reads silently, lips pursed. Then a faint smile, not of amusement, of fear. A mainstream historical fact, menus in the Baroque era were not simply lists of food, they were symbolic narratives. Written in florid French or Latin, often accompanied by illustrations, they described each course like an act of theater. The names were metaphors, allusions, sometimes gentle insults. It was possible to offend someone just by assigning them a dish that sounded like a confession. He points to a dish on the second course. Size of the bay laurel. He raises an eyebrow. You nod as if this explains something. The menu will be copied and distributed to guests. Each copy will be hand-lettered by a poor scribe who will, by dawn, have carpal tunnel and philosophical questions about parsnip foam. You're allowed into the dining hall. It's not set yet, but it's nearly ready, and it's breathtaking. Dozens of chandeliers float above the long banquet table, each holding scores of beeswax candles, whose flames flicker gently in a draft you cannot feel. The table stretches like a glowing runway, covered in cloth so white you wonder if it's actually stitched from moonlight. Each seat is perfectly spaced, each napkin folded into a different bird of paradise. You notice that the Duke of Saint-Pierre's setting has 3 spoons, all different sizes. One of them is labeled for ambiguity. You don't ask. You begin reading the full menu to yourself as you walk the table. Course I, the river's slow revenge, cold eel in aspic with a fennel glaze arranged like a drowning scene. Course 2, breath of the orchard widow pear and duck terrine served beneath smoked rosemary mist. Course 3, interlude of the reluctant carrot, confit in citrus reduction topped with edible regret. It goes on. Course 8 is titled Gilt Glazed Pheasant. You pause. That one feels personal. You find your seat, though you're not sure how, and it's marked with a tiny card that reads Observer First Class. It's tucked beside a wine glass shaped like a tear. Quirky tidbit time. One actual Baroque feast included a course known only as the fog. Guests were instructed to close their eyes while a mist of mushroom broth was fanned over them. The food never arrived. It was called a conceptual triumph. You sit briefly. The maitre d'hotel passes by again, now holding a ruler. He measures the distance between goblet and charger, adjusts a fork by 2 millimeters, nods. A bell rings faintly in the far distance. It's not for you, it's for the sauce team. You return to the kitchen by a different route. This one paved in burgundy velvet and lined with painted ceilings depicting the lives of various fruits. You stop beneath a panel labeled The Triumph of the Fig and stare for a moment, unsure if it's supposed to be funny. It is, definitely. Back in the kitchens, everything is tenser. The heat has increased. So has the yelling. The menu has triggered an escalation. The jelly team is now working under torchlight, furiously reinforcing a molded palace with reinforced aspic beams. The roast station has run out of time again. The sauce team is whispering urgently, possibly in Latin. Historians still argue whether these menus were written as satire or sincerity. Some scholars insist they were part of a noble's social strategy pair, a dessert called the Duchess's Farewell, with a strategic seating plan, and you might unseat an entire family line. Others believe the cooks just got really into wordplay after their 7th glass of kitchen wine. The sous chef pulls you aside. Course 10 is a problem, she mutters. It's supposed to represent the collapse of idealism. You blink. So, soup? She nods, but with narrative. You watch as she begins shaping Parmesan crisps into falling towers. A bowl of custard nearby is labeled Disillusionment. You don't ask what's in it. The dinner isn't for another few hours, but the momentum is building, like an opera warming up, like thunder in brocade. The pastry team is now sculpting a chariot from nougat. A cat made of marzipan is riding it. A banner from sugar silk flaps gently above them. It reads, Even now we feast. You find yourself smiling, because this isn't just food, it's art, it's panic, it's a cosmic joke. And you, observer or not, are in it now. You glance again at the menu's final course, silence dusted with cinnamon. You feel that in your bones. By now, the menu has taken on the weight of prophecy. You're not entirely convinced that the dish called the Regret of Swans won't be literal. But before any of these poetic and increasingly unhinged courses can be served, they must first arrive, and to do that, they must survive the gauntlet known as ingredient delivery. You find yourself back in the palace's rear courtyard, the supply artery of the feast. It's technically outside, but only in the same way a theater's backstage might technically have a window. The air is colder, touched by the early twilight, but still thrumming with motion. Horses snort impatiently as carts roll through the iron gate. Footmen in liveries unload crates with all the reverence of priests handling relics. Each box bears stamps and seals from faraway ports: Lisbon, Tunis, Goa, Amsterdam, Nagasaki. The deliveries arrive with drama, always drama. First, a crate of lemons from Izmir, bright, waxy, and absurdly fragrant. You watch as one is held aloft by a cook who declares it the perfect sphere before gently kissing it and placing it into a velvet-lined bowl. Not even exaggerating. Next, cinnamon from Ceylon, packed in coils like ancient scrolls, each stick tied with a blue ribbon. You're told they were escorted part of the way by mercenaries. Cinnamon was worth that much. Then a small wooden casket guarded by 2 men containing 6 black truffles. They're sealed in rice, wrapped in silk, and stamped with a noble family's crest. The truffle courier opens the case like a jeweler. One of the truffles is sniffed. The sniffer weeps. A mainstream historical fact. During the Baroque period, many luxury ingredients traveled across vast empires under intense protection. Truffle, saffron, vanilla, and even ice had entire shipping protocols. Ice alone was cut from alpine lakes, wrapped in straw, and rushed to kitchens before it could melt sometimes, with soldiers on horseback clearing roads ahead of it. And then comes the snow. Yes, actual snow delivered in giant blocks packed with sawdust and prayers. It's unloaded into the sorbet cellar by 12 men moving like acolytes. They're sweating, despite the chill, and one collapses from sheer reverence or exhaustion. It's hard to tell. Following the snow is a mysterious bundle labeled Birds Handle with Philosophy. You peek. Inside larks, quail, pigeons, all prepped, all unusually symmetrical. A small note reads, best when roasted in melancholy. You back away slowly. At this point, the kitchen's quartermaster appears. He is a man with the moral flexibility of a mercenary and the accounting precision of a board god. His scroll contains every item expected for the feast, including 42 blood oranges, 6 wheels of contraband Dutch cheese, 1 entire sturgeon, 200 candied violets, as many artichokes as decency allows. He doesn't look up as a cart tips slightly and spills marzipan doves across the flagstones. He simply sighs and marks something off with his quill. You notice a delay near the herb crates. There's an argument about time, specifically whether it's been emotionally overused this season. A young chef insists on mint. A veteran shouts, "No one wants a refreshing pheasant." A compromise is reached with tarragon. Everyone nods, though no one is happy. Then comes the fruit scandal. A crate of figs arrives. They're from Portugal, rare, sweet, perfect. Too perfect. One fig is sliced open, a worm wriggles inside. Gasps. Swearing in 3 languages, a nearby cook dramatically faints. A fruit inspector is summoned. He inspects the remaining figs with a monocle and a prayer. He deems them acceptable but emotionally compromised. The figs are rebranded as rustic. Your fringe tidbit: at a banquet in 1704, a single overripe pear caused such offense that the host exiled an entire family, their crime bringing it as a gift and not as a metaphor. You make your way to the fish station. Here things are calmer but not saner. The sturgeon, now unpacked, rests in a marble trough, its body adorned with rosemary sprigs and moral ambiguity. A cook is filleting a trout while reciting poetry. No one stops him. It's oddly soothing. You approach a tub labeled live eels. Handle with regret. 1 eel stares at you. You walk faster. And finally, in the most fortified crate of all lies, the vanilla. Real vanilla. From the New World, dark oily pods that smell like dreams and diplomacy. A lockbox is opened, the pods are counted. The quartermaster nods, the crate is relocked. Historians still argue whether the obsession with rare ingredients in Baroque feasting was about power performance or paranoia. Was it about showing dominance over nature, or just a desperate attempt to impress people who were already impressed? You pass by the dairy section. A single wheel of aged cheese is being serenaded by a flutist. You don't stop to ask why, you simply accept it. Back inside the kitchen, the chaos has harmonized. There's a rhythm now. The sugar sculptures hum, the pastry girls spin, the stock pot sings. The head chef emerges like a general arms behind his back, nodding gravely as he surveys the produce, the truffles, the butter, and the questionable figs. He turns to you. Goose arrived yet, he asks. You blink. Which one? He raises an eyebrow. The one with the wig. You don't ask. You nod. Then you follow the trail of tarragon sprigs and lemon peels back to the heart of the kitchen, where the first sauce is being stirred, the bread is being warmed, and the goose, wigged or not, is presumably rehearsing her aria. Dinner is still hours away, but the palace now smells like promise and salt. And in the corner, the sturgeon winks. Probably. There's a moment, just a sliver of stillness when you cross back into the main dining hall, and everything feels suspended. The chaos of the kitchens fades, muffled by walls thick with velvet and intention. Here in this immense room, time doesn't so much pass as it poses. The chandeliers burn brighter now, casting amber halos on the polished wood paneling. Each flame is mirrored again and again by wall-length looking glasses until the entire hall seems to stretch into infinity, a glittering tunnel of candlelight and gold leaf. And there, at the center of it all, is the table. It is not a table in the normal sense. It is more of a terrestrial constellation, an impossibly long strip of linen that runs from one end of the hall to the other, decked in more cutlery than scents, more plates than people, and napkins so elaborately folded they may require architectural licenses. You approach cautiously. Every setting is identical in placement, but distinct in attitude. The Duchess of Varine's napkin is shaped like a phoenix mid-resurrection. The Marquis of Brentier's resembles a weeping willow. Your own, presumably for the role of humble observer, is a modest but emotionally resonant triangle. A mainstream historical fact. Tables at Baroque banquets were not just for eating, they were statements. Long often T or U-shaped, they symbolized hierarchy. The further you sat from the host, the more obvious your social distance. Every inch of linen was calculated. Distance between goblet and charger, measured. Height of the floral arrangement, measured. Candlewick length, measured. Emotional damage from being seated next to a second cousin instead of a duke, immeasurable. You walk the length of the table, taking in the place cards. Each one is handwritten on parchment, sealed with wax, and tucked into miniature silver easels shaped like harp-playing angels. One is already smudged, possibly by design. At each setting rests a small covered dish, a palette, a muse bouche not yet uncovered, but already whispering threats of pickled shallots and fermented cream. You pass a centerpiece that must have taken a week to construct, a sugar recreation of Olympus, complete with edible thunderbolts and powdered satyrs climbing a candied Mount Helicon. One of the satyrs appears to be misbehaving with a gumdrop. You adjust his posture discreetly. There is a low rumble, a cart being wheeled in. You step aside as a footman glides past with a tray of goblets carved from Venetian crystal. Each one is tinted slightly differently: rose, cobalt, smoky, gray, sea glass, green. They shimmer like illusions. And then comes the measuring. Ah, yes. The maitre d'hotel, accompanied by two solemn assistants, begins the ritual of alignment. They use tiny brass rulers to confirm the exact distance between plates. One footman gently nudges a charger half a centimeter to the left. Another whispers better and makes the sign of the cross. A floral arranger trails behind them, inserting last-minute blooms into the garlands. Primroses, violets, and the infamous night-blooming dignity, a flower so temperamental it was banned from 3 royal courts. You pause by a small podium near the head of the table. A scroll is placed upon it, the master menu. Its calligraphy curls like treble clefs. The first few lines read like a romance novel. Course I, the river's lament beneath frosted leaves. Course 2, the return of the chicken, enlightened. You stop reading when you see Course 4, a suspicion of beans, that one could go many ways. Your quirky tidbit for this evening: at the court of Louis XIV, it was briefly fashionable to include edible surprises in the tableware, tiny poems tucked into loaves, jokes carved into the underside of cheese rinds, and in one unfortunate case, a drawing of the Spanish ambassador in compromising pastry form. This trend ended after an ambassador took offense and challenged a puff pastry to a duel. The puff pastry lost. Returning your attention to the hall, you notice the mirrors. They are not passive decor. They are participants. Each guest who will sit at this table will face not just the nobility across from them, but also their own reflection, and the reflections of every dish, every sauce, every eye roll and raised eyebrow. It is both intimacy and exposure, flattery and surveillance. Historians still argue whether these mirrored halls were intended for self-reflection or social control. Some believe they amplified the grandeur of the feast. Others suspect it was the original form of reality. Television nobles watching nobles eat. You drift toward the far end of the hall where the musicians are tuning. They sit behind a curtain of silk, invisible but omnipresent. Their music is timed not to accompany the meal, but to control it. Faster rhythms mean it's time to serve. Slow adagios suggest a speech. A minor key played too close to the duck course may trigger a riot. A single triangle is struck delicately, a sound barely louder than thought, and suddenly the door opens. The guests arrive. You step aside as they begin to file in. First the minor barons, their wigs tall and optimism short. Then the viscounts, their faces powdered into perpetual surprise. A lady dressed in what can only be described as gilded ambition glides past. Her gown sweeps 3 place cards off the table. They smile, they murmur, they perform the dance of the court. You notice the Duchess of Verine has brought her lapdog again. It is wearing a velvet cloak and possibly eyeliner. The Duke of Saint-Pierre makes his entrance last on purpose because he has cultivated the aura of someone always arriving. He gestures faintly at his chair, and a servant adjusts it by exactly 1 inch. The Duke nods, having triumphed once more over furniture. And now the hush. Everyone is seated. The candles flicker. The music holds its breath. The maitre d'hotel gives the smallest nod. And from the hidden kitchens below, the first course begins its ascent. You watch the first tray appear through the service door, held high by a page no older than 12, balancing it like a relic. On it, a single silver dish covered. Behind it, more trays, more boys, more food, more mystery. The river's lament is coming. The enlightened chicken is just behind it. The suspicion of beans waits in the wings. The table glows, the guests shimmer. You, dear observer, are still standing. Barely. Let the banquet begin. The first cloche is lifted, and a single ripple of breath passes through the room. A collective inhale, perfectly timed, Not coached, just deeply conditioned. It's not so much that the food is surprising, but that it dares to exist so boldly. There it sits, a curled piece of eel glazed with pomegranate molasses, garnished with something orange and angry-looking, nestled atop a transparent disc of jellied celery root. It's called The River's Lament Beneath Frosted Leaves. You're not sure what's lamenting, but it might be you. And this is just course I. You're seated now next to a duke whose powdered wig is large enough to require its own chair, and a countess who speaks only in questions. As the cloches are lifted down the table, you can't help but marvel at the precision. No chaos, no clatter, just silent silver and steam. But then, as the servers sweep toward the second row of guests, you hear it, a soft metallic clink. Something just went 1 centimeter off script. You glance to your left. The countess is frowning at her oyster fork. Not an oyster fork, the oyster fork, the one with the gold inlaid handle shaped like a sea serpent. And crucially, the one she was expecting to have. But it sits shockingly on the plate of her neighbor, the Duchess of Rivienne, and so begins the tableware war of 1692. A mainstream historical fact. In the Baroque courts of Europe, flatware was a symbol of social standing. Certain pieces were custom designed for individual families. Oyster forks, fish knives, truffle graters, even specialized grape shears, these were heirlooms and power statements. Having the wrong one at the wrong place could be considered not just an insult, but a political maneuver. The countess clears her throat, loudly. The duchess doesn't look up. Her hand rests on the fork, casually, threateningly. A footman approaches. He pauses. He sees what's happening. He freezes. And now you are part of it. You, the innocent observer, the quiet seat filler with no noble title but a deep love of food, are handed a tray by a servant who mistakes you for an intermediary. On the tray, a second oyster fork, nearly identical but not quite. It lacks the serpent detail. You now hold the peace offering. Do you present it to the countess, who will know instantly it's an imitation, or to the duchess, who will accept it only to assert dominance? You do the unthinkable. You place the replica fork neatly between them, and then you sit back. The countess glances at it, then at the duchess, then at you. The duchess lifts the fork, takes one perfect disdainful bite of her oyster, and says, "Passable." Tension breaks, forks are used, no one dies. But you are now remembered. Quirky tidbit time. There was once a minor noble in Prague who was banished from court for bringing a spoon to a goose course. He tried to play it off as symbolic minimalism. The king was not amused, neither was the goose. Back at your table, the first course is being cleared. You catch a glimpse of someone 2 seats down trying to discreetly hide their eel under a napkin. It slides out, quivers, and is swiftly retrieved by a page with the reflexes of a jungle cat. Now comes course 2, the return of the chicken enlightened. This is not your typical poultry. Each plate features a singular boneless piece of chicken breast, poached in something opalescent, perched atop a glowing mound of lemon thyme risotto that literally steams in the shape of a halo. A tiny silver fork rests beside it with a note, "Please use only this fork or risk diminishing the enlightenment." The countess murmurs last year's enlightenment was more moving. The duke simply grunts and begins chewing. Halfway through the dish, the room darkens slightly. An assistant lowers a curtain to create emotional lighting. You're told it helps with digestion. You believe them. Historians still argue whether this level of spectacle was meant to honor the food or distract from it. Some suggest the food was never the point, that the real feast was the drama. That flavor came second to meaning. That to truly taste anything, one had to believe in the idea of it. You look down at your risotto. It does oddly taste philosophical. Kind of lemony, kind of lonely. Course 3 is Interlude of the Reluctant Carrot. Yes, that's the real name. The plate is white, almost empty. At its center, one slender carrot roasted, glazed in cardamom honey, and wrapped in a translucent ribbon of pickled beet. There's also, because of course, there is a single edible flower borage. The carrot is angled to look like it's trying to escape the plate. You hesitate, but then you eat it, and it is weirdly perfect. The duke coughs. The countess fans herself. The footman behind you mouths, "I love that one," as he clears the dish. Now the mood shifts. The orchestra begins to play a movement in G minor, soft, sad like a love letter written by candlelight and regret. Servers bring out goblets filled with violet pear wine, poured in synchronized arcs. One splash lands on a marzipan cherub. It melts a little. No one reacts. Then you feel it. The guests are loosening. Not physically, they're still corseted and collared within inches of collapse, but socially. The jokes begin, the murmurs rise. A guest down the table lifts a spoon and proclaims, "I am reborn." Someone claps. Someone laughs. A lady lifts her napkin to her eyes, and then it happens. A small bell rings, just once, a gentle ting. A servant runs out of the room. You watch as he returns, holding a replacement oyster fork. Not the fake, the real one. The one with the sea serpent and tiny ruby eye. It is placed silently beside the Countess. She nods once. Peace is truly restored. You glance at your own fork. It's plain, honest, slightly bent. You hold it like a sword. And you wonder if this is only course 3. What on earth will they serve when the menu gets to the silence of swans? The hush that follows the tableware truce doesn't last long. In fact, it's immediately replaced by something far more nerve-wracking, a slow, synchronized wobble. It begins at the far end of the table, barely perceptible. A jelly tower taller than a toddler quivers. Not from movement. There's no draft, no tray disturbance, but from expectation. As the servers file back in, each holding a towering, translucent architectural marvel, the entire table seems to hold its breath. The jellies have arrived, or as the menu solemnly calls them, refracted regrets and cold triumphs in 3 movements. Each jelly is a different shape, pyramids, domes, spirals, even a few elaborate cubes that seem to defy gravity. They are studded with vegetables, meats, herbs, petals. One appears to have a whole fish floating inside, like a ghost caught mid-swim. One is entirely opaque, one glows faintly. You're handed your portion on a plate that's just a bit too cold. A perfectly sculpted dome, ruby red and trembling at the edges, with a tiny gilded bay leaf pressed into its top like a crown. Around it, droplets of aspic like frozen tears. You raise your fork slowly, partly out of reverence, mostly out of fear. A mainstream historical fact, aspics were all the rage in the Baroque period, particularly in France and Austria. Meat or fish stock was clarified and reduced with natural gelatin, usually from bones or fish bladders, then cooled to create transparent, quivering molds. Within these were suspended everything from boiled eggs to trout fillets to whole stuffed pigeons. Jellies were a way of showing control over nature, heat, and texture, a kind of edible trophy. You take a bite. It's cold, savory. The stock is beef, but laced with white wine and hints of mace and clove. There's a cube of root vegetable inside. Possibly rutabaga, possibly just something the chef had strong feelings about. Beside you, the Duke's jelly is more elaborate. His holds suspended walnuts, slivers of quail, and a faint swirl of green parsley oil perhaps, or an abstract expression of envy. The Countess uses a heated spoon to slice hers cleanly in half. It collapses with a soft sigh. You glance up, and that's when you see it, the central jelly. It sits in the middle of the table, a monument unto itself. Taller than your arm, set on a crystal pedestal, it's molded in the shape of a small palace. You recognize the windows, the turrets, even the sugar-carved hedges. It is a jelly replica of the very palace you're sitting in. Inside the translucent walls float tiny, candied herbs, and yes, a single sugared swan suspended mid-flap. Quirky tidbit time, a real banquet held at the court of Saxony in the 1720s featured a jelly that depicted a map of the known world, with continents outlined in truffle shavings and oceans of veal stock. It collapsed under candle heat before it could be served, reportedly reducing 2 cartographers to tears. Back at your end of the table, one of the smaller jellies is misbehaving. It's the cube, the one shaped like a starburst. It begins to slide ever so slightly toward the edge of its dish. Guests notice. A few lean in. A server appears with a spoon ready to catch it. It tilts further, quivers, and then, against all odds, it settles. Perfectly still, a round of polite applause follows. Historians still argue whether the elaborate jellies were eaten or simply admired. Some say they were meant to be consumed quickly before melting. Others argue they were conversation pieces, provocative, ephemeral, and inherently tragic, like edible performance art. A few believe they were simply a way for chefs to show dominance over bones and physics. You watch the servers retreat now, carrying empty trays and slightly trembling hands. The orchestra resumes, harp and harpsichord, playing a tune so slow it feels like a memory. The room's light dims again, not from servants, but from clouds passing outside. Thunder rumbles far away, like a sous chef remembering he forgot the capers. Another course is coming. But this one has changed the room. There's something hypnotic about the jellies. Their transparency, their fragility, their brief, shimmering lifespan. The Duke beside you mutters, "They never serve enough aspic," even as he struggles to finish his third serving. The Countess uses her spoon to carve her jelly into the shape of a flower. She sets it on a saucer and pushes it to the center of the table, where it sits like a tribute to a meal that hasn't ended yet. Then you hear it a soft, gummy thwack. The jelly replica of the palace has collapsed. One turret gives way. The walls slide inward. The sugared swan folds. The crystal pedestal now holds what looks like an extremely expensive puddle. The room goes still. A child seated 2 chairs down claps once. His governess quickly stills his hands, but the tension is broken. Laughter bubbles up. Someone raises a toast to entropy. And just like that, the mood lightens again. The jellies are cleared. The Countess dabs her lips. The Duke raises a spoon in salute. The music shifts, something lighter now, almost playful. The cloches for the next course are wheeled in. You can smell citrus and mint. But for one brief wobbling moment, the jellies own the room. You sit back chilled from the aspic and warmed by the absurdity. And you think, if this is what they do with cold food, what fresh madness awaits. With the hot, the jelly aftermath still clings to the air like a memory, or the ghost of chicken stock. Guests murmur softly, warmed by laughter and wine, but chilled by gelatin, which is precisely the moment the kitchen decides to introduce something so cold, so shocking, so undeniably flamboyant that it threatens to rewire your face. The sorbet has arrived, or as the menu calls it, a pause of icy clarity before the fall. Each portion is presented in a delicate glass bowl set atop a bed of crushed snow. Real snow from the Alps, flown in, preserved, and fanned gently during transport by a man who only answers to the snow steward. A roll passed from father to son, allegedly. You receive your bowl with the gravity of someone being knighted. Inside a single perfect scoop, pale lemon, topped with the thinnest shard of candied citrus peel you've ever seen, so delicate it trembles when you breathe near it. A silver spoon rests beside it, curved like a swan's neck. You're about to take a bite, and then the room shifts. Because down the table, Viscount Thorold has already taken his bite, and he is not okay. His eyes widen, his jaw trembles. A faint, icy whistle escapes his nose. He grips the tablecloth as if bracing for emotional impact. The Duke beside you leans over and mutters, "Oh no, it's happening again." You hesitate, then you take a bite, and the world vanishes. The sorbet explodes with frozen clarity, a piercing lemon so sharp it feels like a moral lesson. A citrus storm underscored by something herbal thyme, tarragon. No, wait. It's fear of flavor. The cold wraps around your teeth, your gums, your memories. You're pretty sure your ancestors flinched. A mainstream historical fact, sorbet originating from Arabic and Persian Sharbat traditions, was introduced to Europe in the 17th century and became a court favorite almost immediately. But producing it required enormous effort, storing and hauling ice hand churning with salt and snow and serving it before it melted. Its very existence at a banquet was a flex of imperial power, wealth, and science. You lower your spoon slowly. The Viscount is now dabbing his forehead with a velvet kerchief. A page boy offers him a cordial of honeyed milk. He waves it away and whispers, "I saw God." Another server arrives with the second flavor. Yes, there's more. This time a scoop of violet and cucumber. More subtle, more floral, but still brain freeze adjacent. The Countess beside you purrs, "Ah, this tastes like secrets being kept politely." The Duke disagrees. Tastes like regret and bathwater. He finishes the bowl anyway. Around you reactions vary. A baroness sobs quietly into her sorbet, whispering, "He proposed over this flavor." A marquis tosses his spoon over his shoulder and declares, "Too introspective." A young musician seated among the lesser gentry takes a single bite and begins composing a fugue, involuntarily. Then comes the third scoop. They call it black pepper and pomegranate, a farewell to simplicity. You're not sure who authorized this, but they should either be crowned or arrested. It's not bad, it's just surprising. It wakes up parts of your mouth you didn't know had opinions. The sweetness arrives last, after the spice, after the confusion, after the mild existential crisis. Quirky tidbit time. At the Austrian court, a sorbet once caused a ministerial shakeup. The foreign minister suffered a nosebleed from cold citrus, and his fainting spell was interpreted as diplomatic insult. The sorbet chef was reassigned to pastry and never worked with lemons again. And here's where it gets theatrical. The final scoop arrives nestled in a carved cucumber, half surrounded by dry ice that flows dramatically over the table. The flavor, memory of orchard rain. What does that even mean? You take a bite. It tastes like a spring you've never lived through. It tastes like a sigh on the back steps of a forgotten villa. It tastes like very fancy apples. Fancy. Historians still argue whether these narrative sorbets were meant to be taken seriously. Some claim they were tongue-in-cheek, like edible poems. Others insist the nobility needed food to express what society wouldn't let them say aloud, that an orange blossom sorbet could whisper heartbreak more elegantly than any court ballad. You glance down the table. The Viscount has recovered. Barely. He's smiling now, weakly. His spoon is stuck in his cravat. No one comments. The Countess is scribbling on the tablecloth with her finger lost in a floral reverie. And the Duke is motioning for more. I want the pepper one again, he says. I think I hate it, but I also think it understands me. The orchestra resumes this time with bells, tiny crystalline chimes that match the clinking of glass bowls as they're cleared. The servers walk slower now, aware of the hush they're moving through. One stumbles slightly on a bit of melting ice. A guest applauds. As the final sorbet disappears from the table, the lighting shifts again. Candles are replaced. A new wave of wine is poured, this one deep red, the color of velvet shadows. The moment has passed, but you feel it. Cold at your core, sweet in your throat, and slightly suspicious of fruit. You lean back, your body, conflicted, your tongue buzzing, and you realize they haven't even started the hot courses yet. You're barely thawed from the sorbet course when the next signal is given, not a trumpet this time, but a low, velvety chime, like someone striking a tuning fork made from suspicion. You glance toward the service doors just as they swing open in synchronized silence, and in walks a man with the posture of a saint and the eyebrows of a villain. This is the head saucier. You know it instantly. He does not wear a hat. He does not carry a tray. He carries a ladle polished to a mirror shine, and he holds it the way one might hold an ancient relic or a family grudge. His apron is spotless. His walk is glacial. His aura existential seasoning. He does not announce himself. He does not need to. Instead, he begins his circuit, pausing behind each guest, observing the newly delivered dish, and, if satisfied, nodding once before allowing the sauce to be applied. This is the philosophy of sauce, and this is where things get complicated. The course is described on the menu as veal 2 ways innocent and enlightened. One portion is roasted and sliced like a confession. The other, stewed slowly in wine and herbs, arrives in a miniature copper pot on the side, as if shy. Both are plated with edible flowers and what looks suspiciously like edible smoke. But the sauces are the real theater. Each one is unique, customized, personal. The saucier moves to your side. He peers at your veal. He leans closer. He stares at you into your soul, possibly, then raises his ladle, and with terrifying calm applies a streak of burgundy sauce in a perfectly executed swoop across the plate. It looks like a velvet ribbon. It smells like despair soaked in time. You are not allowed to ask what's in it. A mainstream historical fact, the saucier was one of the most respected and feared positions in early modern kitchens. Sauces were considered the language of refinement. A noble's reputation could be built on their ability to discern a reduction's base note or identify a bechamel that had been left to sulk too long. Entire feuds began with oversalted hollandaise. You take your first bite. The veal is perfect. But the sauce does something else. It lingers in the mouth, warms the spine, repeats itself in new languages. It's savory, sure, but also whispery, like it knows secrets, like it's apologizing for something it did last year at a different banquet. You glance at your neighbor's plate. Different sauce, lighter, almost creamy, with hints of lemon and something floral. The saucier has moved on. Guests begin whispering. Did you get the sorrel reduction? No, I got elderberry mustard. Mine's blue. Was it supposed to be blue? They looked at me funny. You overhear a duke 3 seats down murmur, I believe mine just insulted me, and I liked it. The countess beside you lowers her fork slowly. This sauce reminds me of my second marriage, she says, staring into the distance. And then suddenly, a clatter. A spoon hits the floor. Everyone freezes, because it happened near the bechamel. The saucier pivots. The server's tense. The guest, a minor noble with the jawline of an apology, has knocked over his pot of sauce. It spills on his sleeve, on the table, on the menu. Gasps. A violinist whimpers. The saucier approaches. Slowly. He He kneels, he lifts the ladle, he dabs at the stain, he sniffs. And then, with the serenity of someone who has witnessed centuries of culinary injustice, he says, "This was not our best velouté anyway," and walks away. The room exhales. Quirky tidbit: in a banquet hosted by the Spanish court in 1689, a diplomatic incident was nearly caused when a visiting duke was served a green sauce meant for a bishop. The result: a 20-minute duel of compliments and a treaty drafted in gravy. Back at your table, another dish arrives. This one simple roasted artichoke hearts with saffron cream. But before anyone can touch theirs, a second saucier, yes, there are two, makes the rounds. She is younger, quieter. Her sauces are more daring. She applies them in dots, smears, clouds. Someone receives a spoonful of foam described as basil air. You get a subtle drizzle of something pale and acidic. It cuts through the richness like a kind letter in a storm. And now things shift again, because not all sauces are friendly. You hear murmurs of a dangerous reduction, something involving anchovy essence and betrayal, a sauce so complex it was banned from one kitchen, for philosophical reasons. Someone across the room stands up and shouts, "I taste grief." They sit down again. No one argues. Historians still argue whether sauces like these were meant to enhance or obscure. Were they the culinary equivalent of theater masks? Were they emotional prosthetics, helping nobles feel what they couldn't say aloud? Or were they just really good at hiding slightly overcooked duck? Your dish is cleared. The sauce remains smeared artfully across the porcelain, like the final line of a poem you're not meant to understand. The orchestra swells gently, violins and low woodwinds. The saucier leaves the hall ladle held high, trailing silence, and the faint smell of burnt rosemary. The countess beside you whispers, "I want to write him a letter." The duke mutters, "He once told me my palate was regrettably practical. It changed my life." And you lick your fork. No regrets. Your tongue is still haunted by sauce when the next round of cloches arrives. This time, no mysterious ladle bearer accompanies the servers. No fanfare, no orchestral swell. Just a quiet collective bracing of stomachs and expectations. This is it. The main sequence begins. According to the menu, this part of the feast is titled "The Clock of Flesh, a Culinary Allegory in 14 Courses. Not even a wink of irony. You suspect it was written either by a poet or someone trapped in a protein trance. The first dish, invisible pike. You stare at your plate. It appears empty, save for a dusting of something white, a droplet of something green, and a whisper of lemon scent hanging in the air. The waiter murmurs the fish has been distilled into essence. To taste it is to remember it. You take a bite. It tastes like lakewater youth and disappointment. It's oddly good. Then comes the second course, a hare confit buried under petals, ash, and something referred to as the memory of rosemary. The meat is so tender it disintegrates under the fork. You chew thoughtfully, as if solving a riddle. The ash is real, the rosemary possibly just psychological. The third is duck, or perhaps swan. The menu says, "A waterfowl of doubt." It arrives resting on a nest of baked straw and bitter greens. You're instructed not to eat the feathers. No one listens. By the fourth course, people begin slowing down. Even the duke looks uncertain. The countess keeps unbuttoning and rebuttoning her gloves. Someone's powdered wig is listing dangerously. You press on. The food is beautiful, each dish an abstract painting in motion, but it's also relentless. A mainstream historical fact: Baroque banquets, particularly in France and Italy, often featured more than a dozen full courses. Unlike modern tasting menus, these were not delicate bites, but theatrical, often hearty servings. Diners were expected to pace themselves, converse, and perform the art of consumption itself. The fifth dish is roast partridge, but it arrives shrouded in a dome of bread that must be cracked open like a tomb. The aroma that escapes is divine and mildly accusatory. The sixth is a cheese terrine served with a sauce that fizzes slightly on the tongue. To remind you, the waiter explains cryptically of boundaries. You're not sure whose. The seventh is where things go sideways. It's wild boar, or rather 3 boars, each prepared differently. One smoked, one pickled, one presented as a concept. The concept version is a smear of jam, a whisper of truffle, and a very small flag that reads "Imagine." You feel tears prick your eyes, not from flavor, from fatigue. The eighth course revives you, a braised mushroom tart with wine foam and melancholy onion. The duke declares it the emotional peak of the night. The ninth lamb, slow cooked in a crust of herbs and regret. It comes with a poem scrolled up and tucked beside the bone. The poem rhymes and not well. A quirky tidbit: in 1711, a banquet held for the coronation of Charles VI included a roast ox so large that a child was hidden inside it as a surprise. The child popped out during dessert and recited a Latin ode. The nobility was not amused. The ox, however, received applause. The 10th course is where the hallucinations begin. You swear your pigeon pie winks at you. It smells of mace fig and longing. The crust is embroidered with pastry vines and edible pearls. You take a bite and are transported briefly to your grandmother's kitchen, despite the fact she's never owned a pigeon or endorsed edible pearls. The 11th is a palate cleanser, chilled cucumber water with mint ice. Guests look grateful, some weep. The 12th game and guilt. A roast quail on a bed of blackened carrots, presented under a bell jar filled with wood smoke. You lift the dome and the smoke escapes like a memory, leaving a locked room. The 13th course is terrifying in its simplicity. A single radish, carved into the shape of a heart, sprinkled with salt and served with a tiny piece of bread. The waiter whispers, a reflection on hunger. The 14th, the final course, is called the end of appetite. It is blessedly a warm broth, clear, fragrant, served in a heavy porcelain cup, no garnishes, no flourishes, just comfort. You sip, the room goes quiet. The orchestra plays a single note. Historians still argue whether the later courses in these banquets were meant to feed or to unmake. Were they rewards for endurance? Rituals of suffering wrapped in opulence? Or was it simply what happened when kings and chefs had too much time and too little humility? You sit back, dazed, full, somehow changed. The Duke beside you is asleep, head gently nestled in a breadbasket. The Countess has written a sonnet on a napkin. A cardinal down the table is staring into space and murmuring something about eels. You have survived. 14 courses, one lifetime. And dessert has not even arrived. The silence after the 14th course feels holy. A sort of spiritual reset. Plates are cleared with reverence. Napkins flutter to laps like falling petals. The orchestra, now down to just a harp and a single flute, plays something that sounds like moonlight taking a nap. You dare not speak. Then from the far end of the hall, there's a rustle, a shifting of fabric, a squeak of wheels. Something is coming. It's the dessert cart. No, a dessert procession. At the front is a towering confectionery structure, pulled by 2 footmen and supported at the base by what appears to be a wheeled chaise. Behind it trail a line of smaller servers, each carrying something more absurd than the last sugar fan's candied peacock feathers, and one brave soul balancing a spun sugar lute on a velvet pillow. You blink, and that's when you see it. Marching proudly in the middle of the procession is a goose. Yes, a goose. Not roasted, not poached, not garnished or stuffed. A live goose in full powdered wig and tiny velvet shoes, strutting like it owns the estate. It honks once politely, and the room erupts in applause. This is the opera goose. Trained, costumed, and according to the program tucked beneath your water goblet, capable of limited but emotionally resonant vocalizations. The musicians adjust, the lights dim, and the goose begins to perform. A mainstream historical fact. In the early 18th century, animal acts at court were not uncommon. Dogs, parrots, and yes, even geese were trained to perform basic routines, dancing, ringing bells, or mimicking sounds as part of the evening's entertainment. But few were ever credited with operatic capacity, that historians agree is likely an embellishment. Still, the goose opens its beak and emits a long, wavering tone that sounds suspiciously like a mezzo-soprano note in mourning. The hall holds its breath, and then the goose spins. Twice, curtsies. Someone weeps. Is the music beautiful? Not exactly. Is it on key? Not consistently. But somehow it moves you. The Duke stirs from his breadbasket nap, peers at the performance, and mutters, "I once loved a soprano like that," then promptly falls back asleep. The performance continues for 4 full minutes. It ends with the goose placing one small webbed foot on a sugar pedestal and bowing. Thunderous applause. A marzipan garland is draped over its neck. The goose is escorted out like royalty. The dessert carts arrive for real this time, rolling quietly piled with absurdities. One is entirely dedicated to sugar sculpture, castles, swans, tiny chariots. Another holds tarts shaped like musical instruments, complete with strings of candied citrus peel. And then, of course, there's the towering Pièce Montée, a spun sugar monument, 4 feet high, resembling a miniature city, complete with fireworks. Yes, actual fireworks, which are lit briefly before being doused by champagne. You're handed a plate with pear custard rose petal gelée and a cube of something called honey sorrow. You bite in. It tastes warm, like nostalgia, like a nap in a sunbeam that never existed. A quirky tidbit, one 17th century banquet included a dessert shaped like a miniature monastery with custard monks chanting in sugar alcoves. It melted halfway through the meal and was later blamed for a guest's existential crisis. At your table, conversation has softened to a dreamlike murmur. Did the goose really sing? Or was it more of an interpretive honk? Was that almond or an emotion? A final plate arrives just as you think the meal is ending. It's a single cherry on a gold spoon. The waiter leans in and whispers for reflection. You eat it. It's bitter, sweet, faintly boozy, and probably metaphorical. Historians still argue whether the opera goose actually existed or was a satirical invention to mock the excesses of Baroque court life. Some point to engravings that feature costumed birds with suspiciously soulful eyes. Others claim no goose could be trained for such subtlety. A smaller faction insists the goose wasn't real, but the emotions it evoked were. The countess beside you is sketching the goose on her napkin. I shall remember her forever, she sighs. The Duke, now fully conscious again, toasts to foul divas and sweet endings. You lean back in your chair, full to bursting emotionally and digestively. The banquet isn't over, not technically, but in your heart, you know, this was the climax. A goose sang you through dessert, and now nothing can surprise you. You think it's over. You really do. The goose has bowed. The desserts have dazzled. Guests are reclined at various angles, some upright, some listing like ships after a long storm. A few nobles are fanning themselves with their menus. One marquis is using a sugar swan as a pillow. But then a bell rings, not the sharp dinner bell from before, but a soft tinkling note, like someone gently dropped a teaspoon onto a silk cushion. It's time for the evening amusements. You're guided, not so much escorted as gently nudged toward a smaller chamber off to the side of the main dining hall. Velvet curtains part, candles flicker. The smell of candied almonds mingles with expensive hair powder and a hint of citrus peel. You have entered the parlor of games and gossip. A long table awaits, laid with cards, ivory dice, sugar paste game boards, and most notably, a bowl of questionably decorative apples carved into suspiciously suggestive shapes. A servant offers you a goblet of something called afterwine, which tastes like melted licorice and memories of poor decisions. You sip. It burns a little, but it's polite to accept. The Duke, of course, is already seated at the game table. The Countess flutters her fan and sighs, at last the part where no one pretends to behave. You are invited to join a parlor game called Guess That Duchess. It's played like this. Someone reads aloud a list of increasingly absurd traits, rumors, and alleged behaviors, and the others try to guess which noblewoman it refers to without using her actual name. The first round includes the hints. Sleeps in a room lined with brocade napkins. May have set fire to a portrait out of jealousy. Once slapped a bishop with a custard tart. You guess incorrectly. Everyone gasps. Apparently it was Duchess Leontine, not Duchess Margot. You apologize. The Duchess in question giggles from behind her fan, but you get the feeling it's not entirely forgiven. A mainstream historical fact, parlor games were a staple of Baroque entertainment, often veiled in wit and mockery. Nobles were expected to laugh even when the joke was at their expense, though duels sometimes followed games that struck too close to the powdered nerve. The second game, Sauce or Scandal. You are presented with phrases and must decide, is it a historical sauce recipe or a court scandal disguised as one? Examples. Burnt figs in Marsala reduction. Sauce. The chef's nephew poisoned the shrimp to impress a duchess. Scandal. Gooseberry compote with alibi. Trick question both. A quirky tidbit in one documented 1704 banquet. An actual sauce recipe for pears of discretion was circulated under the pretense of culinary discussion, but was secretly a coded message referencing an affair between a chamberlain and a visiting soprano. The pears, it turns out, were innocent. The room bubbles with laughter, soft, sleepy, scandalous laughter. You drift from game to game occasionally, winning, mostly losing, but always rewarded with another sweet, another sip, another story whispered behind gloves. A violinist in the corner begins playing what sounds like a lullaby composed entirely of flirtation. And that's when you notice the gossip tier. Yes, a separate platform subtly raised where guests can stand and whisper conspiracies without bending down. It's covered in pillows, flowers, and what may be the discarded train of a duchess's gown. You are summoned up there. Tell us what you saw in the kitchens, a nobleman purrs. Is it true the saucier once dated the pastry chef? Did you see the jelly quiver twice, or was that a hallucination? You share. They gasp. Someone faints briefly onto a cushion. A servant brings you a chocolate dipped in violet syrup. Another hands you a miniature envelope. Inside is a single sugared almond and a message that reads, "Tomorrow, we remember none of this." You tuck it into your coat. Historians still argue whether these post-banquet amusements were spontaneous or meticulously planned. Some diaries suggest guests improvised entire scenes complete with costumes and scandal reenactments. Others believe the court carefully choreographed even the gossip, because chaos is most delicious when served intentionally. You return to your seat now, quite convinced that you have aged 5 years since the sorbet. Someone beside you snores into their wine. Another is sketching portraits of every guest caught mid-laugh. The Countess is taken to narrating people's thoughts aloud in rhyming couplets. Outside the windows, the sky is turning from velvet black to deep plum. Dawn is a rumor. A soft bell signals the end of the games. You exhale, still alive, still in possession of your dignity, barely. Your reward, a final pastry the size of a coin filled with cinnamon and honesty. You bite in. You are not sure if you've just eaten dessert or a moral. Either way, it's the best thing you've had all night. You barely finish the last crumbs of that cinnamon honesty tart when the doors creak open again, slowly, dramatically, as if the building itself needs a moment to brace for what's next. A footman announces with the same seriousness one might reserve for wartime news, "Ladies and gentlemen, the herb garden awaits." There's a ripple of motion as guests rouse themselves from their sugar-drugged stupor. The Duke stretches like a walrus in velvet. The Countess refreshes her wig with a spritz of rose water and something labeled emotionally restorative essence. Everyone begins filing outside. You follow because at this point resistance is futile. Outside, the garden is soaked in moonlight. Tiny lanterns bob from tree branches. The hedges have been trimmed into the shapes of mythological creatures, some more accurate than others. One hedge centaur is clearly just a horse with a human face glued on. The scent is intoxicating: basil, lavender, mint, sage. And something else. Something that smells like tension. It doesn't take long to find the source. Two noblemen, neither of whom you recognize, though one has the confident mustache of a man who duels often, are standing 10 paces apart. Between them lies a silver tray. On it, a truffle, not a chocolate one. A real knobby, dirt-clinging, mind-alteringly expensive black truffle the size of a baby's fist. This, you learn, is the truffle duel. You sidle up to a whispering cluster of servants who are laying bets. Turns out the duel began over a comment made during the Game and Guilt course. One of the men implied the other's family only uses preserved truffles in their sauces. Gasp. Scandal. War. Now they're here in the moonlit herb garden with dessert forks drawn. Yes, dessert forks, because this is the Baroque period, and if someone is going to stab someone over fungi, they're going to do it politely. A mainstream historical fact: while formal duels over food were rare, insults regarding lineage, presentation, or culinary extravagance could lead to sudden challenges, particularly when honor or perceived refinement was on the line. The food merely became the spark. It was never about the mushroom, it was about the metaphor. The duel is swift and ridiculous. They circle, they glare. One lunges, he misses. The other flicks his fork. The truffle rolls dramatically off the tray and into a nearby fountain. Gasps echo across the hedges. But before anyone can mourn the lost mushroom, a third figure steps forward. It's the opera goose handler holding a second truffle aloft like the Holy Grail. For peace, he says. And just like that, the duel ends. Forks are lowered, pride is preserved. Everyone claps. You too clap, because frankly you have no idea what else to do. The group is then invited to wander the rest of the garden. You stroll past moonlit vines, herbal labyrinths, and an inexplicably large fennel topiary. Servants offer nightcaps, lavender, cordial elderflower tonic, and something they only refer to as forget-me-not. You sip one, then another. Eventually your feet bring you to a hidden alcove where two noblewomen are singing softly to a rosemary bush. You do not question this. A quirky tidbit. In some Baroque households, herb gardens weren't just functional. They were spiritual. Certain plants were believed to absorb gossip, preserve virtue, or act as impromptu confessionals. Speak to the time one saying went and forget your crime. The air is thick with this kind of belief. At one point you overhear someone arguing with a chamomile shrub. Historians still argue whether these nocturnal wanderings were planned as part of the banquet ritual, or were simply tolerated eccentricities. Some letters suggest nobles felt safest expressing scandalous feelings under moonlight among lemon balm and dill. Others propose that the garden served as a decompression chamber after the emotional toll of sauce. Whatever the reason, it works. You feel lighter. Even the Duke, now arm in arm with the opera goose who has somehow returned, seems content. A final bell rings, this one almost a sigh, soft and low. The guests begin drifting back inside, not to the dining hall, but to scattered chaise longues, cushioned alcoves, and quiet rooms, where they will nap, pretend to read, or stare blankly into mid-distance for several hours. You too are guided to a room, a small one, cozy, with one velvet chair and a small tray of candied fennel seeds. You sit. The moon casts shadows that look like music, and somewhere outside the goose begins to hum. You don't remember falling asleep in the velvet chair, only the feeling of your limbs finally surrendering, your senses dulled, like the last note of the flute, drifting away in the herb-scented dark. But you wake not with a start, but a slow, curious float some hours later. The room is still dim, the tray of candied fennel untouched. Somewhere far off, a lute plays a melody so delicate it might be a memory. A footman appears beside you, as if conjured. It's time for the reckoning, he says gently, as though informing you of tea. You blink. He offers a damp cloth for your hands, a spritz of something lemony for your pulse points, then guides you, half-dreaming, through a narrow corridor. You emerge into a new chamber, the room of reckoning. And before you panic, no, this isn't a medieval torture chamber. No one is going to accuse you of heresy. The reckoning is digestive. The nobles are gathered, once again now in loose robes and night slippers, surrounding a long table draped in cream-colored silk. The lighting is soft, the conversation hushed. Everyone looks slightly dazed, slightly wiser, and absolutely bloated. The Duke mutters, "My liver has filed for independence." The Countess fans herself with a napkin that has the words "sauce dreams" embroidered on the edge. At the head of the table sits a man, an apothecary by the looks of it. He is surrounded by bottles, jars, and tiny satchels. This is Master Alphonse, the official banquet physic. His job, to evaluate what everyone just did to themselves. He clears his throat. Friends, you have passed through vinegar and vice, past aspic and almond, through birds and barberries and beyond. You have dined thoroughly. He bows slightly. Now let us begin the sacred rite of bitters and burps, a mainstream historical fact. After particularly gluttonous feasts, Baroque households often employed an after-dinner doctor whose responsibility was to administer medicinal cordials, purgatives, or digestives. These could be anything from gentian root and wormwood tinctures to lightly opiated herbal tonics meant to induce calm or, frankly, sleep. You're handed a cordial called Moon Fennel Elixir. It tastes like licorice and disappointment, but in a good way. Next comes the belly ritual. A servant brings a warm lavender-scented brick wrapped in linen to place gently against your midsection. A soft moan escapes your lips before you can stop it. It's fine. Everyone is doing it. The apothecary then asks a series of deeply personal but oddly soothing questions. Have your humors remained in balance? Did the cherry make you feel exposed? On a scale of 1 to 10, how haunted are you by the boar course? You answer truthfully. 7. Moderately. And it's always the jelly that lingers. A quirky tidbit. In certain royal banquets of the Spanish court, post-meal rituals included scented silence, a 15-minute period where guests were expected to say nothing, sip fennel tea, and hold a sprig of lavender between thumb and forefinger to align the inner wines. Most accounts suggest the silence lasted about 4 minutes. Here there is no enforced silence, but a collective hush falls, perhaps from fullness, perhaps from awe, or perhaps because a man has just entered the room on stilts. Yes, stilts. And he's juggling 3 flaming oranges. No one flinches, because this apparently is the traditional closing act. He juggles. He bows. He recites a short poem about digestion and the futility of regret. Then he exits. The apothecary announces the final rite, the blotting of the night. You are each handed a square of soft muslin infused with mint oil and instructed to gently press it to your forehead, then to your belly, and finally to your heart. Release what the sauces could not, says the apothecary. You do. You feel emptied and somehow cherished. Historians still argue whether these rituals were taken seriously by the guests or were elaborate theater meant to preserve the illusion of control. One diary claims the reckoning was just an excuse to drink bitters and gossip. Another describes it as the most sacred part of the banquet where souls were sorted from sauce. You lean back once more. The Duke has fallen asleep mid-blot. The Countess is humming what might be a lullaby for her spleen. You close your eyes. For a moment you are weightless. A candle sputters, a spoon clinks. Then silence. This time real silence. No geese, no forks, no sauce. Just breath. Just rest. Just peace. You wake again. Or maybe you never really slept. It's hard to tell anymore in a world shaped by sauce and moonlight. The room of reckoning is empty now. The linen brick is cool against your belly. A single candle remains its flame, dancing like it knows a secret. You rise slowly as if you're made of custard. Outside the chamber, the estate feels quieter, lighter, as though even the walls have unbuttoned their waistcoats. A servant glides by and nods toward a staircase. The sunrise observatory, they whisper. You follow. Up the spiral stone steps, each one dusted with something that smells faintly like vanilla, because of course. You reach the observatory as the sky just begins to tint from indigo to rose. There are others already there, some reclined on cushions, others sipping a clear herbal tonic from glass flutes shaped like swan necks. Everyone speaks in whispers, or not at all. A violin hums quietly from somewhere unseen. The windows are tall and arching. Beyond them, the gardens stretch like dreamland mist curling over the hedges. The herb maze looks like a brain exhaling. Somewhere, the opera goose has finally put itself to bed. And you're just beginning to understand. This wasn't a feast. It was a pilgrimage. A slow-motion journey through indulgence, performance, ego, and community, one sauce at a time. A mainstream historical fact, some 17th century banquets were deliberately staged as moral allegories. Each course corresponded to a sin or a virtue. Each drink a symbol. Guests were expected to reflect not only on flavor, but on their own character, letting the absurdity act as a mirror. Eating was thinking. Satiety was a kind of enlightenment. In this dawn-soaked room, you feel that. Your belly is full, your heart is unsure, your mind is somewhere between poetry and indigestion. The Countess appears beside you now, wrapped in a silken shawl, patterned with tiny printed olives. She leans in and says, "Do you remember the fish that blinked?" "You do, too well." She sighs. "I dreamt it whispered my secrets." You believe her. Another guest mutters, "I think the sorbet tried to teach me Latin." You nod. You're certain your tart tried to teach you regret. Below, the kitchen staff begins stirring. You can hear the clink of copper pots, the low hum of sleep-deprived gossip. A new banquet will happen tonight, but this one is about to end. A server appears beside you with a single item, a small slip of parchment folded in 2 quarters. Your name is inked on the outside. You open it. Inside a single sentence. "In sauce we remember who we were before dessert." You fold it again and tuck it into your sleeve. A quirky tidbit. There is evidence that certain Baroque nobles employed dream sommeliers, servants, who would interpret your dreams post-feast based on what you ate and when. One report insists that dreaming of anchovy custard foretold good luck in lawsuits. Another claimed pomegranate glaze meant your enemies were plotting. Historians still argue whether these traditions were rooted in belief or in the simple joy of absurdity. Was it mysticism, sarcasm, a court too bored and too rich to care? Does it matter? You feel changed in a way you can't explain. Like you lived an entire novel made of gravy and candlelight. Like you loved a goose once and she sang you clean. The sun peaks over the horizon, lighting up the spires of the estate. A breeze wafts in, bringing with it the scent of cardamom and overcooked ambition. Someone behind you murmurs, "Will breakfast be simpler?" The server chuckles softly. "Madam, breakfast is only the prologue." You sigh. "Of course it is." You close your eyes. You listen to the wind, and in that suspended moment, between exhaustion and bliss, you feel it. Not fullness, not fatigue, but the gentle, weightless understanding that nothing will ever taste like this again. You descend the observatory stairs like a ghost in borrowed shoes. The estate is quiet now, not in the way of sleep, but in the way of endings. The air is thick with finality, like the last note of a symphony still echoing in a velvet-curtained hall. You're led without being asked to the hall of departures, a long corridor lined with mirrors. You catch your reflection in each one, and somehow you look slightly more Baroque than you did last night, hair a bit more tousled, shadows under the eyes, a faint trace of sugar near your collar. You are not the same guest who arrived. At the end of the hallway, a final table waits. Upon it, a ledger, a quill, and a single loaf of bread wrapped in embroidered linen. Your name is inscribed in the ledger already. Beneath it, the note, "Attended with honor, departed with sauce." You sign anyway, adding a small flourish. You've earned it. The servant offers the bread. For the road, they say with a wink. No one should re-enter the world on an empty soul. You thank them, You cradle the bread. Then the doors open, and you step out into morning. Sunlight hits your face like applause. The road stretches before you. Birds chirp far too enthusiastically for someone who just survived 17 courses of psychological cuisine. You begin walking, and as you do, memories float up like herbs in warm broth. The velvet-furred fish, the duel over truffles, the dessert that judged you, the apothecary who asked about your humors as if they were scandalous relatives, the goose that may or may not have sung an aria in your dreams. You smile. You survived. Not just the sauces or the soufflés or the soul-crushing density of almond paste, but the entire Baroque ritual of feeling too much, eating too much, knowing too little, and loving it anyway. A mainstream historical fact, the very notion of banquet in the Baroque era was less about sustenance and more about performance. Food was art, allegory, seduction, and spectacle. Guests didn't merely eat, they participated in a drama of manners, identity, and sometimes absolute nonsense. It was theater with gravy. You pause near a low stone wall. From your satchel, you unwrap the bread. It's still warm. Inside, baked into the crust in tiny letters, is a message. You squint. It says, "Come hungry next time." You laugh, out loud, alone, with no powdered wig in sight. A quirky tidbit. Some estates baked secret messages into guest gifts, coded affirmations or inside jokes meant only for the recipient. Others used the bread as a signal. One seed type meant, "You're welcome back." Another meant, "Maybe don't. Yours contains caraway." You choose to take it as a good sign. Historians still argue whether the absurdity of Baroque banquets served as social satire, spiritual ritual, or just elite entertainment. But they all agree on one thing no one left unchanged. And neither do you. Because while your waistcoat may never button the same way again, and you may never trust jelly fully, and you might dream of sugar swans for weeks, you've earned something rarer than a truffle duel or a whispered recipe. You've earned the quiet, contented certainty that you were part of something ridiculous, beautiful, and strange, and you were there for all of it, and that is enough. And now, as your journey comes to an end, let your mind loosen its grip on powdered wigs, sauced pheasants, and violins floating through herb-scented dawn. Let the Baroque echoes fade softly, slowly, like music retreating into the folds of memory. You're no longer in the candlelit halls or whispering gardens. You're somewhere quieter, somewhere still. Breathe in the soft hush of linen sheets, the imagined scent of lemon balm and lavender, the weight of a night well spent, and the lightness of having let yourself drift. Let each detail melt like spun sugar on your tongue, the duel that turned into a dance, the fish with knowing eyes, the desserts that almost understood you. Let them settle not as memories, but as dreams that smile from just behind the curtain of sleep. You are safe. You are full, and the world outside with its mornings and meetings and mundane affairs can wait. Tonight you tasted a history most people never even knew existed, and tomorrow you'll remember only the softness, the warmth, the laughter, the improbable elegance of a world that once got lost in its own sauce. So close your eyes, rest your thoughts, and let the quiet gather around you like a velvet shawl. You are no longer walking. You are floating, drifting, gone. Sweet dreams, traveler of truffle duels and jelly swans. May your pillows be plush, your dreams mildly absurd, and your sauce forever balanced.